Welcome back to Restless. I'm Father Joseph Gill, priest of the Diocese of Bridgeport, Connecticut. You've joined Lauren, and Father Perrella, another brother priest here from the Diocese of Bridgeport, who we invited onto the show to talk about some great topics. Although we're starting off with a really boring one. So feel free to fall asleep in the midst of this. No, I'm just kidding. The topic is virtue. Virtue, which is very exciting because a virtuous life is a happy life.
I don't want to talk about virtues.
Okay, let's talk about Lord of the Rings.
Well, I want to talk about that too.
No, that's the next episode.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about cheese, but we don't always get what we want, including cheese, right now.
True.
But anyway, so Father Perrella is currently parochial vicar at St. Catherine's and St. Agnes in Greenwich, Old Riverside. What do you call it?
Riverside.
Riverside.
Yeah.
Okay.
Being from New Hampshire originally, I had to get used to like these sort of neighborhood designations that like actually mean something. You know, like you can even like people will put it on their, in
there's
their
like different
address.
zip codes and stuff.
Yeah.
For like in Greenwich, there's like 5 or 6 different places.
Yeah, so it's St. Catherine and St. Agnes Parish in Riverside, which is in Greenwich.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So when we talked about different topics that Father Perrella was interested in talking about, one was indeed virtue, which I think is something that's not talked about enough. A lot of times we perhaps talk about holiness, but aren't sure how to get to holiness. Maybe we'll talk about avoiding sin, as important as that is. But I think it's more important to not just avoid sin, as if we were kind of like locking ourselves in a room and having people slip pizzas under the door. Okay, we'll avoid sin that way, but we're not going to grow in virtue. So what's a good definition of virtue that you're familiar with?
So a working definition I like to use with people is that it's a stable habit of doing the good in some fashion, and it's found in the balance in between extremes. So there's kind of 3 parts to that. So it's something good. It's a habit.
I would even add morally good, right? Because can you have the virtue of brushing your teeth?
It depends. It depends. It kind of depends on what you mean. I would argue maybe. There are different types of virtues, and some are natural virtues, some are supernatural virtues, some...
and they all fall under different categories. Cleanliness is under... I don't know, justice,
right.
Temperance.
There are different types of virtue. I would say anything that is legitimately good can be categorized in some kind of virtue or virtues. They tend to overlap, and not all of them have like a clean-cut name for themselves. Sometimes you have to describe them. Yeah. But just starting with the understanding that it's some type of legitimate good that you are doing, so there's choosing involved as a habit, and it's found in the middle between extremes. That part's going to be really key.
Yeah. We'll get to that. We'll get to that later on. I like that definition. That's good. I actually also like Aristotle's definition of virtue, which is excellence in being human. That's great. If you want to be an excellent human being, you're going to be a virtuous human being.
Yes. To be truly human, to be fully alive is to be virtuous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is contrary to the way some people think of virtue if you're thinking in terms of just morality or just right and wrong and just the obligations that we have
to do what's right.
Right. That sounds like it's restricting and potentially leads to a less fruitful, less free, less human life. But Aristotle, Plato, many philosophers, many saints would say that like the virtuous person is the most truly free.
Yeah, and the most truly themselves.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's important. Because if you want to be really you, like, you want to live your truth, well, it means virtue.
Yeah. It's funny because the temptations to sin often paint a picture in our minds of something that is dazzling, something that's off the beaten path, something that's alluring, something that's different, something that's novel. But the reality of sin is it's quite boring and repetitive.
Yeah.
Like people sin in basically all the same ways. Like people who live lives like, devoted to sin or just like with stubborn patterns of sin in their life. Like you're all like, those are kind of cookie cutter people.
Yeah.
It's the saints, it's virtuous people that start to shine as something unique. Because the virtues are something that everyone can practice, but it looks different in every person. Like and this is a bit of a tangent, but important when talking about virtue, is that like to practice virtues doesn't mean that you have to become identical to some other virtuous person.
Yes.
So like I don't know
Especially
about
not in the externals. Yeah.
right. Like I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing in my faith, everyone that I knew who was also into their Catholic faith kind of was throwing into like the common stew pot. We're like, okay, how do we grow in our faith? And everyone's got different things. Okay, pray the rosary, go to mass, got to be virtuous, got to read the Bible, but just throwing all these things together like that, it's just this kind of sloshy mess. Like you need some order. And one of those things for me was I noticed people talking about the lives of the saints. And so people would hold up like, well, St. Francis, when he was tempted to lust or other things, he'd roll in thorn bushes. And this saint,
Right.
fasted on bread and
potato
water.
a day from
Right.
John Vianney.
Right. And these, St. Catherine of Siena didn't want to be beautiful, even though she was. So she like tried to make herself look ugly. Like virtue doesn't mean imitating all of the things that a specific person did, even a saint.
Right. Right.
We hold up the saints as models of virtue, but it's for the sake of practicing those virtues, not necessarily by living the virtue the way they lived it.
Did you ever have that temptation
Which one?
to act like something other than yourself in your quest for holiness?
I don't think so.
No?
No.
That's good.
Have you?
Oh yeah, totally.
Like what? What's an
Totally.
example?
Like a very clear example in my mind was that my vision of holiness was that you have to be quiet, and I'm not a quiet person and at all. And like I remember my first summer as a seminarian, we were going on this whitewater rafting trip, with the youth group, and I was like, all right, let's go, and and I was just kind of like cutting loose and like having a great time and everything. And after that, I kind of like went to my holy hour later that day, and I was beating myself up spiritually because I was like, oh my gosh, I wasn't quiet. I wasn't like pious and praying while we were rafting down the river. And then like the next day, one of the moms of one of the kids was working in the office, and she's like, wow, my son thought you were just like a really fun, normal guy to hang out with. He really liked the fact that you like radiated Christ that way. And I was like, wait, that's okay? Like to like be like outgoing and holy?
Yeah, I think for me, growing up when I was much younger, the saints' lives just seemed unattainable.
They
And
often
then
can.
you learn, oh, we're actually all called to be like saints, and then start to become more formed spiritually and spend more time with Christ, and then recognizing how I've changed, and that it is possible. But I think virtue is something that we probably all strive for our entire lives.
Mm.
It's definitely a
We just keep
lifelong
working towards.
process.
Yeah.
Well, that's the interesting thing is that virtue is the midpoint between two extremes, but the midpoint can go up and up and up. Like
Yes.
you can always grow more in that virtue.
Yeah. So I think in order to grow in virtue, it's really important. Like I'm a visual person, and I've got a bit of a math and science background, and so like I kind of have to see this in sort of like on an X and Y axis, or
Right.
like I picture it as like a mountain. And if a person thinks of virtue simply as, okay, well, I need to be, well, I know. So, here's the problem. People focus less on virtue than they do on avoiding sin, and they focus less on avoiding sin than they do avoiding feeling guilt and shame.
Mm.
This is horribly reductive. People take the whole of the walk with God, they reduce it to the moral side. They reduce the moral side down to not doing bad, and they reduce that down to not doing the things that make me feel bad. You're gonna
That's a great insight.
yeah, and
Never thought of that.
it's hugely reductive, and it's an impossible endeavor in the end because there's not enough there. There's no hope, there's no joy, there's no freedom, there's no guidance.
There's just rules.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just rules, and
And arbitrary rules at that.
right. And your constant point of reference is what you've done wrong, and feeling wrong. So if that's the point of departure for people, and I think for a lot of people it is, because that's where they start. Like they realize, oh, I need to start following Christ. I need to start taking my faith seriously. So I've got to get rid of these sins out of my life.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was just thinking 2 days ago when I was at Cardinal Academy, there was a sophomore who said to me in the middle of class, he said, Father Joe, is it wrong to listen to Kendrick Lamar? the rapper.
Mm.
And I said, that's the wrong question to ask. The
Mm.
question to ask is, does Kendrick Lamar help you become more like Christ?
Mm.
He's like, oh no. Well, then why are you doing it? Right? I mean, it's not whether it's a sin or not is kind of not the point.
Right, because getting closer to Jesus isn't just done by avoiding sin. You have to become more like him.
Yeah.
And if I'm only thinking about what things I need to avoid doing, then I'm going to find a sin in my life or a vice. The opposite of virtue is vice, so vice being a habit of doing something wrong. If I say, okay, you know what, I'm, for example, I'm really proud. I'm very prideful. I'm very selfish. I'm very self-centered. And I think, okay, you know what, I gotta stop doing that because that's bad. And my goal is I just got to get rid of the pride. And I think, okay, well, we want as little of that as possible. So let's get as far away from that as possible. And then I think to myself, you know what? Okay, so what's the opposite of being self-centered? Well, that's being humble, selfless, focusing on others instead of myself. If I only see this in sort of like a one-dimensional axis, like on one side is vanity and pride and selfishness, and the other end is humility, then the farther I go in one direction, the better. The farther I go away from pride and closer to humility by thinking of myself less, focusing on myself less, I will think that I'm getting more virtuous. But the problem is that there's another axis. Virtue's found in between two extremes. And so, like, if you want to get to the top of a mountain to succeed in the climb or to enjoy the view or whatever it is, going forward indefinitely isn't going to get you there. Eventually, you're going to stop gaining elevation and start going back down the mountain. And so growing in virtue is not, okay, well, you know what? I need to start being as self-regretful as possible, because people then start treating themselves like a doormat.
Well, that's where we go to the other extreme of virtue pursued in the wrong way, perhaps. Well, I don't know what you would call it. Over virtue,
well, see, and that's the thing
misunderstand.
I think it's a misguided pursuit of virtue. I don't think you can ever have too much virtue.
Right, because that's the up.
Right, exactly. The higher up the mountain, because in a strange turn of the metaphor, like the mountain doesn't have a limit.
But I think that's why Aquinas says that the charioteer of the virtues, the most important one of the natural virtues, is prudence.
Yeah.
Because prudence is, how do you exercise this virtue in this circumstance, right? So using your example of humility, right? So, I mean, Christ was very humble when he stood there and allowed people to spit on him. Does that mean that I have to do the same if someone's spitting on me? Or can I, walk away? Can I argue back at them? Can I defend myself? So prudence says, well, when should I exercise the virtue, and when is this the time to actually exercise a different virtue?
Yeah. Virtues all fit together. This is another key thing, is that virtues all call for one another. So they're sort of different facets of the same gem, or different, pieces of the same mosaic. So, and the same is true of sins. Like when someone's trying to examine their conscience, or if they examine their conscience badly, and I need to help them do that on an occasion, it's the problem I frequently see is that, well, no, you're never just going to find one sin. You're going to find 4 or 7 or 10.
Well, right, because pride ultimately undergirds every sin.
Right. You do sins in, they're connected to one another. They feed off one another. The same is true of virtues. And so more virtue is always better. And growing in one virtue is going to help you grow in another virtue. But prudence, which is sort of the crown jewel of all of them, is the virtue of knowing how to be virtuous.
Yeah.
It's the virtue of knowing how to adjust the dial, like adjust the direction that you're going. So like what direction on the compass exactly should I take to be going as directly up the mountain as possible?
Yeah.
And at what point do I need to alter that direction? Or at what point is like another virtue need to be
exercised? Yeah.
Exercised, yes.
Sure. So let's get personal. I think every human being excels in certain natural virtues and has to struggle for certain virtues. What virtue do you think comes naturally to you personally? And what virtue is one that's perhaps more difficult to obtain for you?
I mean,
Lauren, what
it's
do you
funny.
think?
I think I have moments where I'm prudent,
Okay.
but I think I don't even think I'm anywhere near understanding prudence fully.
Mm.
I think the more you grow spiritually, the better of an understanding you have.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a justice person,
Are you?
but I don't know if then I go too far. Like, this is justice, but maybe there doesn't need to be justice,
Mm. Hmm.
at the time. Like the example you gave with Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Because things have their time and place.
Sure. Sure. Well, that's interesting. I mean, so you're more of a justice person, and it's not a bad thing. But again,
Right.
it's the virtue we excel in. Then we have to make sure we don't,
Right.
pursue it in the wrong way. But that's
Right.
great.
Because justice ultimately has to do with rightness, which has to do with what is good. And so wanting things to be right and good, the more accurately we see what is right and good and work for that, the better.
Right.
But
What's your natural virtue and your naturals?
let's see. I mean, I'm super virtuous, so it's hard to pick which one.
So humility clearly
Yeah,
is your virtue.
yeah.
you
I'm
excel in.
super humble. I'm courageous, loving, wise,
Wow.
brilliant.
Wow, teach me your ways.
Yeah. I'll say that one that comes to mind is compassion.
Mm.
And it's a compassion, and I'm thinking also as kind of compassion where it mixes in with relationships.
Mm.
I mean, compassion's always shown towards a person, but what I'm thinking of is that God, I think, is by His grace, He's given me a heart where I really care about people.
Awesome.
And I want what's good for people. And
that makes you a good priest.
I certainly try to be a good priest, and I like to think that that is an asset. To want what's good for a person, even if it costs me something.
Mm.
I don't know. It's connected to seeing like the beauty of a person.
Yeah.
Which, like, whether you like them a whole lot or not, seeing good in them and having an appreciative love of the good that that they're in the image of Christ, that there is something in them that you see that's relatable or admirable, or that you see that they're struggling and you have compassion the way Christ would have compassion. Like that resonates a lot with me, and so I am very willing to give to people, particularly when something stirs a sense of compassion or pity or mercy. Like, oh, this person is having a hard time.
That's
I get
awesome.
that.
That's awesome. And that's something we excel in, because that's something I still need to work in more.
Well, before we get to your myriad faults, like, well, what are you good at? What comes naturally to you?
I'm kind of with you in the justice department.
Mm-hmm.
No pun intended. But more so like order and industriousness. Like, I love to work hard, I love to get stuff done, to accomplish stuff. But sometimes, again, that good virtue sometimes goes too far. For example, I am definitely a workaholic, and sometimes it's run roughshod over other people. For example, if I'd be sitting in a meeting trying to accomplish something and someone is going on and on and on, like just talking, wandering all over the place, I'd be like, get to the point. Like, we got stuff to do. So
are there times that could be virtuous to do that, do you think?
Yes, because everyone else in the meeting's thinking the same thing and no one wants to say it.
Well, so, and why, for the sake of helping those who are following this conversation understand that, because I think sometimes I've struggled with this at different points in my life, and other people do too. I think when it seems like two different virtues are in competition, or that they don't actually, you can't actually do or have both. Like, you have to either be just and right and ordered, or you're compassionate and lenient
and merciful
and let things go. Are those actually in competition?
I don't know. You're a justice person. What do you think? I
think it's always changing, right? Circumstantial. You got to know, okay, does this really matter right now, or this is not the time? You know, is it appropriate for me to say get to the point, or is it not? In some settings it is, in others it's not.
So that's where prudence, I guess, comes in, right?
True.
To know.
Yeah. So if I want to be most just, I need prudence to help me know not whether I should be just or not, but how do I apply that, the setting of things right, to the circumstances on the ground? Like what actual circumstances, what people are involved?
I think other than the virtue of perhaps faith, hope, and love, I think you have to, I don't know that, I think you have to use prudence. Faith, hope, and love you can use all the time, right? You can always have faith, you can always have love, okay. But how that's lived out, I think, is different in different occasions. So sometimes the loving action is just, right? So, I mean, you work at a school, and it's times that you've had to mete out certain punishments, right, for your kids in your class.
Yeah. Or I weigh it, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Is it worth it to, I don't know, follow the rule that I'm supposed to, or should I talk to this kid first?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I could just follow the procedure, you know, you get a demerit, or I could wait and approach the kid, and maybe there was some other unforeseen reason why they did what they did, right?
And I would say, from what you're describing, that done correctly, that's both an exercise of justice and of mercy and love, because justice isn't just follow the rules or don't do the wrong thing. It's doing and promoting what's right and good. And love also happens to want what is right and good. So whether or not the rules are applied, or whether or not somebody is punished, that sort of thing, I don't think.
But it is hard to know because we don't know hearts.
Right.
We can't see into someone else's heart. Why did you do that thing? Well, I mean, they can tell us an answer, but is that really why? You know, is there something deeper? Is it?
Right. And I think what I'm trying to improve on now is, even when you're wronged, let's say, it's like you've already communicated something, you've sent the email, it should be clear, and like still there's this habit of things not happening. You're much better off to go in a kind of hopeful, would you be able to help me with this? Like, you try to build the other person up, even though you're already kind of at your wit's end with them. Because whenever we're accusatory or you were wrong, you know, people just, their defenses go up, and then they turn on you. So you lose anyway. You were already losing, and then you lose even more, you know, in that relationship.
Usually, yes. But aren't there sometimes that you would say something and it kind of shocks someone to their senses?
Sure, that could be too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had that encounter where later on, like, I've confessed saying something that I thought was really rude to this person because they just needed to hear a really blunt truth, and they were like, "Wow, that changed my life," you know.
Yeah.
Well, is it a man?
Because
Because what I found
is
many women really underneath it all is insecurity.
Yes. Yeah.
So you can't do that. You know, you've got to be so delicate and cautious, even though it's like killing me inside, right?
Yeah.
Well, because that has to do with wanting what is most good for that person. Like, that is both just and loving. And so, like, if I absolutely can imagine a situation where the loving thing, the most good thing that I can promote for somebody, involves something that is a direct, maybe blunt intervention. I would only do that sort of thing if, in my best estimation, I thought that would have the outcome that I'm desiring, which is them to actually grow in virtue and holiness.
That's where prudence comes in.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to say your piece, even though you know someone will reject it, because that is the best
most loving
state.
option.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the best state of affairs I can come up with.
It is hard. I mean, we don't know the insecurity that people are dealing with, and there are times that I get frustrated with a student or with a parishioner, and later on I find out there are extenuating circumstances. Their mom is sick, or they're dealing with this or that. And so I try to be more kind than necessary, but then at the same time without being indulgent. It's a balance, like all virtue. It's a balance.
Right. Because that would be, I would say, a vice that someone might think is being virtuous, where, okay, I need to be loving, or I want to be loving. I prefer to be loving and merciful. And therefore, I'm going to just continually and always let things go.
Yeah.
As if letting things go is always the most good or most loving. And it's not.
Right.
like this is huge, like when it comes to like boundaries in relationships, whether it's in families or with a significant other or friends or people you work with. Sometimes like boundaries help people to love, like saying this but not farther, yes to this but no to that, is a way of respecting yourself, respecting others. And that's a key thing. Like if you don't only love others and not yourself.
Yeah.
So there, if I only let things go and only turn the other cheek, if I only ignore things that are actual problems, things get worse.
They get a lot worse. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So with the few minutes that we have left, let's talk about how do we grow in virtue? Because I think a lot of people out there are sitting there thinking, gosh, I really, I lack patience. I lack humility. I lack chastity, whatever that virtue is. How does one grow in virtue, especially perhaps if one has lived a life that's been very opposed to that, been very full of vice? What are your techniques and tips?
Well, I would say one thing that was mind-blowing for me was being told how prideful I was.
Oof.
In spiritual direction. So it was someone that was
So
able to say that to me. I mean, this was in the beginning, the very beginning. And it was like, whoa, I am. Like, I didn't see it, right? Because pride can blind you. That's what it does. It blinds you. So I didn't see it, but I was. And that was so helpful. So someone, hopefully, in your life cares for you spiritually enough to point these things out.
So once that realization happens, what steps do you take to overcome that?
Well, I think, a big part of our human life, right, is conquering yourself. So to conquer yourself, you have to know yourself. Mm-hmm. So even just knowing helps a ton.
That's true.
Right? Because, I don't know, hopefully you're striving for goodness and you want to improve. And then things, I think, will just kind of become clear, at least small steps to take.
I mean, it amazes me. I've been following Christ seriously since I was 16 years old, though. And it seems like it's almost like playing whack-a-mole. Got one down. Oh, no, another one cropped up. Oh, no. And maybe it's just I've had all these vices that I didn't realize that I was hiding because perhaps there was a larger one in the way. And then you slay the larger one. You're like, oh, man, there's another one.
But it also shows you're growing in holiness, that you can see those things and you want to improve them.
That's what I hope.
Because people
actually a good sign.
That don't have that awareness, I think, are focused on worldliness or sin. They're in their sin so much that they can't see their vices, or they're not aware of them. They don't know their vices even. It
really is amazing to me, and I'm sure you experienced it as a priest when people go up to you and like, especially in confession, someone will be like, bless me, Father, if I've sinned. I'm a good person. I try to live a good life. I'm like, I'm not here to don't tell me about your virtues, because a saint thinks they're a sinner. A sinner thinks they're a saint. Always the case, right? If you're a sinner, I'm a good person. Dive deeper. Dive deeper, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I found that remembering that virtues and vices are connected together, that they build on one another and call for one another, that's key. Like if a person wants to grow in virtue, frequently in my observation, there's one or a couple vices or sins that stand out, frequently because they provoke specific feelings of guilt, shame, or they see specific problems, like actual damage it's causing or problems it's causing in their life, and so they focus on specific things. But in order to grow in virtue, as well as get rid of vices, which, as we've said, are not identical pursuits, if you only focus on trying to address one sin or grow in one virtue, like you're gonna not make as much progress as if you try to grow in many virtues. If you want to be more loving, you need to be more humble. You also need to be prudent. You need to be just.
Patient.
You need to be patient. So, people who, nobody in our world struggles with chastity. So I'm talking to nobody, but let's imagine
this young adult podcast. Right?
Let's imagine that somebody's struggling with lust and not being chaste. Like it's so easy to focus on that because of the emotions of guilt and shame and that sort of stuff, and the specific things, the negative outcomes it brings in a person's life, and then get frustrated because they're putting in work and they don't see growth in that specific virtue. Well, the problem is that, like, lust is almost never the root sin that a person has. It can be serious and it can cause real problems, but it's almost never the root of somebody's life as a sinner.
Right. There's more to it than that.
Right.
Yeah.
Like why are you turning to lust? Why are you turning to lashing out in anger? Why are you turning to pride? Like there are reasons, and until you know what those reasons are and what good things are missing, or what ways you need to heal, or what ways you need to grow, which may not seem to have anything to do with the sin that's staring you in the face and grabbing your attention. Like
that's true.
If you want to grow in virtue, you need to kind of take stock of, like, to borrow from the Carmelites, like the interior castle, the house of your soul. You need to kind of survey the house. You need to walk around the rooms and find out not just what's the room that you're most bothered by its current state of affairs, but like what else is in here?
Yeah.
What else needs my attention? Because as it turns out, it's easier to grow in one habit by practicing other good habits.
And connected to that, Aquinas and all of the great scholars kind of categorize virtues in two forms. We got theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, and you got the four cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. But under those, there's a lot of other virtues, right? Chastity comes under temperance, for example, because it's being temperate with one's sexual desires. So I think that by practicing a related virtue to that head virtue. So, for example, if someone struggles in chastity, which means that they have a lack of temperance in one area of their life, if they start practicing temperance in another area of their life, for example, they start fasting, they start being more temperate with their YouTube watching, or whatever it is that they need to grow in temperance, then that overarching virtue will strengthen that one specific virtue that's kind of more weak.
Right.
Or, for example, I think humility is really, I would believe, I'm not sure about this, but I'm pretty sure it would fall under justice, because humility is recognizing who you are before God and kind of giving God what he's due, giving ourselves what we're due, which is recognizing we're beloved sinners. So if it's under justice, then one way to grow in humility then would be to practice justice towards God, right? Give him greater worship, acknowledge who he is, praise him for who he is, and then give others their due, right? Listen to others, be patient with them. And then all of a sudden you'll find yourself growing in humility because you've dealt with the justice issue and you're starting to grow in justice as a whole.
Right.
And the humility comes along with that.
Yeah. And sins or vices that seem more stubborn in a person's life can be dealt with by practicing the virtue in easier areas. So, one of the things that can be underneath pride is a need to defend oneself against hurt or injury. And so if pride, if just taking pride head on is difficult, look for ways to address the thing that's really underneath. Ways to take care of yourself so you don't need to put this prideful wall up around yourself. Or if you're struggling with chastity, again, it has to do with, impulse control and your relationship to things that you find desirable, whether rightly or wrongly. So even if you just practice, I'm going to enjoy something a little less. Even if that's not particularly hard to do, that actually will help you in all the other areas where you need to practice.
Right. We're strengthening one's will.
Right.
And virtue is in the will.
Right. So when we're coming up on Lent pretty soon, and people.
You'll probably be listening to this during Lent.
Yeah. So we are in.
We're in Lent.
Season,
I think maybe we're in Easter. I don't know.
The season of Lent we are in right now. When people are thinking of things to do for Lent, it's easy to either just settle for something that's too easy or to think you have to do massive, really painful and difficult things. What if you do something like, I'm gonna not put salt on my food, or I'm gonna put a little less salt on my food than normal, or a little less red pepper than normal, or what if instead of I have to take kind of another version of rolling in the thorn bushes like St. Francis, I'm gonna take cold showers every morning. Some people can pull that off, and God bless them. I cannot. But what if everyone knows the exact right best place to turn the knob to get the shower to the precise temperature that you most desire? What if you set it there and then turn it just a notch down? So it's not even like a cold shower. It's just
that might be worse actually, a lukewarm. Oh man, it's tantalizingly close, but
right,
not there.
Right. The point is that making a decision, a choice, an act of the will to deny yourself something you desire, even if it's not really difficult or really big in its degree. Making a decision to say no, or say
Right.
this much and now I will stop.
Yeah, which is hard. Alphonsus Liguori said it's easier to have complete abstinence than perfect moderation. That's tough, right?
Yeah.
You can't eat just one potato chip, as they say.
Right. Well, and that's what finding ways that it's easy to practice that will transfer over to the places it's difficult.
Yeah.
If it's hard to practice moderation in some area, find a place that it's easy, and don't be fooled into thinking that it's not valuable.
Right. If virtue is a morally good habit, a habitual disposition to the good, any habit is gained by practice.
Right.
We practice it over and over and over again until it becomes second nature.
Right.
And at first, it's clunky, right? When you started learning Frisbee, I'm sure.
I was a natural.
you're-
No, there's my pride, right? No, I'm kidding. No, it
the
took
flicks
some
are
time.
hard, are they
Totally,
not?
yeah. It took like the whole season.
It's
And it
taken
was
about
difficult.
6 years, but it's still pretty lousy.
It's all in the technique, how you hold it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no.
You got to
totally.
keep practicing.
And that's
the
something
only way
I
to do
find
it.
with kids too. Like so many kids, they want to be good at something immediately,
Yeah.
and then they'll give up. But if they stick with it, and it usually doesn't take very long, if they just try to implement what they've been taught, you can change someone from shooting with 2 hands, right? So common for kids.
Basketball.
They push
yeah.
the
Not shooting
basketball
others with a gun.
versus
with a sword.
shooting with 1 hand, and then they develop a nice arc on their shot.
Yeah.
But they've got to try and go through the challenge of it feels awkward.
It does.
You know,
does.
they
And-
feel
and
weaker
virtue
because
feels
they're
awkward
using 1
first
hand
time
instead
you
of
do it.
2. Yeah.
I think that's another really important thing, is if you want to grow in virtue and further than that, holiness, you have to be willing to accept failure.
Mm.
That is not the same thing as saying failure is good in itself, like sinning is good in itself. But in order to become a saint or to become a virtuous person, you have to be able to accept that right here and now, I'm not. And it's okay that I'm where I'm at. If I require perfection of myself now, I'm not going to grow
Right.
because I'm not willing to put in work that doesn't seem to turn. It seems like it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
So like, well, I can't shoot a free throw. So why even try? Well, you need to practice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Practice
So-
and pray. I think those are the 2 keys to growing in virtue.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us on this episode of Restless. You can find us on Veritas Catholic Network. Lauren told me to look directly at the camera when I say this. So we're all looking directly at the camera.
Sign off to the people.
Sign off to the people. Yes, 1350 AM, 103.9 FM. Thank you, Father Perrella, for joining us. Tune in next time where myself, Lauren, and Father Perrella are going to talk about Lord of the Rings. Should be very exciting. Then this is going to be a good episode. But thank you so much for joining us. And now go practice some virtue.